Our second presenter is Brian Lee from Emory, who's going to talk about when bank fail, depositor attention, and the cost of funding of survivors.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Brian Lee. I'm a finance professor at Emory University Boys Business School. And this is joint work with my friend Stephen Wallace, who's a finance professor at Boston College. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for having our paper on this wonderful program. This is a spectacular venue and a very, very nice event. We're just really pleased to be part of this and contribute to this wonderful program. Okay, so without further ado, I want to get started. This for the next slide, yes? Okay, so many research papers that have to do with banking crisis, bank runs, and bank failures, they like to reference the movie It's a Wonderful Life. Okay, which is a great movie. It's a classic. I really like the movie, but I'm going to be slightly alternative and reference a different movie from that classics genre. This is a scene from Mary Poppins. If the scene was vaguely familiar to you, that's where it's from. Okay, for two reasons. The first reason is that it's just a much better movie musically speaking, so I appreciate that. The second and more important reason, in the film, there is a very clear and established notion of a local competition of the bank. Specifically, I'm referring to The Woman Who Feeds Birds. Okay, so if you forgot the plot of the movie, this part of the movie a little bit, the whole bank run crisis episode is starting in the movie because the children don't want to keep the money in the bank. Instead, they want to walk out of the bank and give the money to the woman feeding the birds. Okay, so this analogy doesn't make any sense to you if you don't know the movie. So here is a slide that is going to capture the description of our paper, what we do in a movie reference independent way of describing the paper. Okay, so I'll begin with the big picture motivation. I want to say two things on the motivational note here. The first thing, it doesn't really require an explicit statement to this particular audience that bank failures are very costly, very significant economic events. I think everybody's on board with that statement. The second thing I want to say here is that depositors play a very crucial role in this mechanism, in this context, but they're a very difficult subject to study. There's a whole body of research saying depositors are very sleepy, they never really pay attention to deposit rates, etc. But also at the same time, these same depositors play a really important role in initiating banking crises as well. So that brings us to the particular research question in our paper, which is how do bank failures affect deposits in the local competitor banks? Okay? And so this is a short format presentation, so I'll just highlight the findings and summarize them right away here in the second slide. What we find in the paper, first, deposit rates of competitor banks rise significantly after their competition fails. Okay? Now, is this just the deposit rates, or does it have material impact on the lending side? We find that it indeed does. What we find is the lending growth falls, and also more importantly, the fact that this is a deposit rate story, to sort of illustrate that, what we show is that the non-bank lending in that same local economy is not affected only by banks. Okay? And then we do heterogeneity tests to understand the mechanism behind this finding. What we do is that we find the similar effect going on for banks that have higher leverage, okay? So the ones that perhaps that the depositor might be perceiving as more risky. And also interestingly that insured versus uninsured deposit product rates effects are also the same, which is kind of puzzling, a head scratcher. If something is perceived to be more risky, perhaps this is precisely the reason why depositors are going to require sort of higher compensations of what might be going on. Well, I'm going to show you that the one cross-section that really pops out in our data, that's something that seems to be really explaining this result, is coming from public attention. In other words, what we find is a much stronger effect of this deposit rate finding for bank failure episodes that are receiving higher public attention. Okay? So let me just set the scene with some very overall aggregated trends and data first. Okay? So the first picture that I want to show you is plotting deposit rates and federal funds rate, and also the share of the deposit that belonged to one of the failed banks in the throughout the last 20 years or so. Okay? What we're really going to, of course, bank failures, this is not like a public company doing earnings announcement. It doesn't really happen on a regular basis. It only happens in big crisis periods. So our focus is going to be on this GFC, the 2008 crisis. What we show, what we find, just to set the scene, is that the federal funds rate, of course, goes to zero very, very quickly. Are deposit rates sort of keeping up to go down, or is it kind of more hesitant to go down with the federal funds rate? That's the blue and the red over there. And importantly, what's going on over here, sort of in the backdrop, is that a lot of deposits are associated with one of the failed banks over here. Okay. And the second thing I want to show you is that in this paper, geography matters. So I want to give you a little bit of an idea of to what extent we're seeing bank failures happening across the United States. So in our sample period, what we're seeing is here are all the counties that are colored blue that have reported a bank failure during our sample period. The white means they've never had it during our sample period. Two things that I want to highlight here. The first thing is that bank failures occur kind of broadly across regions. This is not just the East Coast phenomena or the South phenomena. It's sort of West Coast. It's kind of everywhere across the United States is represented in our sample. And the second thing I want to say is, well, this seems to be visible enough event, okay, during our sample period, meaning quite a few counties are represented here. However, it's also not so pervasive. So it's big enough so that we can kind of think of this as an event that's not so rare that we should, we'll see this, we care about this. But at the same time, this is also not so pervasive. We also have the sense of somewhere in the middle in that spectrum. And the third thing I want to say is just generally this notion of public attention around bank failures. Okay, so this is a very simple plot showing you Google search volume about the bank that's having this a failure episode around this failure date, and just a very straightforward picture to show you that people are hearing about this and searching about this bank when this is going on. Several things, of course, are kind of naturally that's related to the generation of the attention. Is going to be the media coverage and the FDIC, which is involved in sort of the public outreach, getting the word out that there is a bank that's closing, and if you have uninsured deposit, this is a number you call it, etc. Okay, so just to set the scene, and I want to go to the findings of the paper. Okay, so without going into the weeds too much and talk about the technical details. So what are we after? In a nutshell, we're trying to estimate the effect of bank failures on same county neighbor banks' deposit rates. Okay. Now, of course, that county might be very different fundamentally from other counties that don't have a competitor bank that's failing. So what we're doing in the specification, you control for county level economic conditions, all these variables that are usual suspects. And as importantly as well, what we're going to do is have bank year time fixed effects, meaning we're going to control for anything that is going on at the total bank level. Now, to give you just a quick intuition in terms of plain English, so imagine a bank X has branches in counties A, B, C, different places, okay, and county C is going to have a neighbor bank that fails. Okay, so we're going to track the change in the deposit rates of county C branch, but also use what's going on with the branches in counties A and B, and tracking that changes over there and using that as a benchmark to estimate the effect. Okay. So the data that we use for this project is a pretty standard sources along the lines of FDIC, the CRA, HMDA data for lending, call reports, the BLS for local economic controls, and then deposit rate information from RateWatch. Okay, so this is our paper's main finding in one figure. Okay, so on the X, what we're showing is the years since bank failure, the local competition having a bank failure episode. And then on the Y is going to be the effect of that event on deposit rates on 100,000 CD. Okay, and the confidence interval to indicate statistical significance. So the story is very simple. The effect on deposit rates is immediate, going up around 4 to 5 basis points. And this is also persistent. It persists for up to 3 years that we see. Okay? So that's one figure to summarize the key main finding of the paper. Now, of course, you can ask a lot of follow-up questions here. The first kind of natural thing to ask is how is this effect robust? Okay, so this is, I'll defer to the paper, but that finding, that number, the main estimate is going to be robust to various different ways to think about alternative measures and different specifications. And then that deposit rate, what's the implication of that onto other things? Like I sort of previewed in the second slide. It does have material impact on the other parts as well. First is going to be deposit volume. So despite the rate being higher, what we find is that there's a deposit outflow. So the volume growth is going down by something like 4.5%. And then the next result that we share in the paper is on small business lending. Because rate going up, this means cost of funding is higher. This then is something that's reflected on the lending side of the bank activity. Small business lending declines by 2%. Okay. Then some more natural follow-up questions that I want to share, just in bullet point style. So the first question is the lending effect driven by local demand for loans? Okay, account is experiencing a bad event. It just means the people who would be taking out loans, there's less demand coming from that side. Well, what we do, one analysis that we do is we look at the mortgage lending going on in the local economy by banks versus non-banks. Okay, so the banks are the ones that rely on deposit for their funding. Non-banks don't. What we find is that for non-banks, they're doing just fine. Okay, in fact, a lot of borrowers are substituting away from banks to go to non-banks. So this kind of makes us think that it's not entirely driven by demand. It's a supply side story as well. The second question is the main effect driven by neighbor banks who are in distress? Okay, so your neighbor had a bank failure episode. Does this mean you're experiencing distress, and that's why your depositors are now demanding more in terms of deposit rates? The main effect is driven actually by well-capitalized banks. So you can cut the local neighbor sample by those that are well-capitalized versus poorly capitalized. But this rate going up, this is happening for everybody, mainly actually by the well-capitalized banks. And then also there's no evidence of bank failure contagion, at least in the specification that we have. Okay? And then similar sort of thought experiment along those lines is the main effect due to panic-induced bank runs. Well, if this was the main thing driving the story, then we would really expect a much bigger effect for uninsured deposits, but that's not what we find in our case. And the last thing is the main effect, stronger for certain bank failures. Is something special to categorize a bank failure that's really driving our main finding. And as I said in the second slide that previews our findings, what we find is that this main effect is primarily driven by highly publicized bank failures using Google search volume. Okay. So at this point, the short presentation format, I don't want to go into the weeds too much, so I can just give you a summary of our paper and then wrap up. So the first thing I wanted to say, bank failures, of course, generate significantly costly spillovers to the neighbors. Okay. The higher deposit rates for neighboring competitor banks who observably in the data seem just well-capitalized, healthy, and all these good things, but they have to raise these rates, meaning their cost of funding has gone up. And this has material impact for the lending side. So the results that I shared with you today are on small business and mortgages, a very standard way to sort of think about that question. And then we argue that this is surprisingly not driven by risk compensation from depositors, but rather it seems like these depositors, their attention about rates perhaps is more heightened, and it's just a uniform increase in the rate sensitivity that's driving and explaining the main finding. Okay. So
thank you.
That's good. Okay.